Imagine waiting more than a decade for the successor to one of the most important hypercars ever created, a machine expected to carry the bloodline of the McLaren F1 and the same one badge as the legendary P1. Now imagine that. When it finally arrives, McLaren gives it what appears to be a fatal disadvantage. The Ferrari F80 has all-wheel drive, electric motors on the front axle, torque vectoring, fully active suspension. The McLaren W1, 1,258 horsepower, sent through only 2 rear tires. No front electric motors, no electric steering. On paper, that does not sound brave. It sounds reckless. So why would McLaren deliberately remove technologies that could make its new hypercar faster and easier to control? And why did it choose Mugello, a circuit owned by Ferrari? For the first full drives, that was not simply a launch, it was a warning. Because the W1 is not trying to defeat the Ferrari F80 by becoming more complicated. It is trying to prove that Ferrari may have become too complicated. And by the end of this story, you will understand why the W1's greatest weapon is something McLaren deliberately chose to leave out. A decision that may have exposed the one weakness hidden inside Ferrari's most advanced hypercar. McLaren does not use the number 1 casually. The McLaren F1 placed the driver in the center, used a carbon fiber monocoque, and although it was never originally designed as a racing car, it went to Le Mans and won. Then came the P1, a hybrid hypercar that used electricity not to become quiet, but to make its combustion engine feel more immediate. It joined the Porsche 918 Spider and Ferrari LaFerrari in the legendary Holy Trinity. So what could possibly follow it? Another 1,000 horsepower hypercar? That was no longer enough. Electric sedans can now accelerate harder than yesterday's supercars. Power that once sounded impossible has become almost ordinary. The next McLaren 1 had to answer a much harder question. How do you make speed feel special again, when speed itself is no longer rare? Behind the driver sits a completely new 4-liter twin-turbocharged V8. On its own, it produces more than 900 horsepower and revs beyond 9,000 RPM. Then McLaren adds an electric motor. Not to give the W1 meaningful electric range, its battery is tiny. The motor exists to eliminate hesitation. The driver presses the throttle. Electric torque arrives immediately. The turbos build pressure, and the V8 keeps pulling toward 9,200 revolutions per minute. The result is 1,258 horsepower and 1,340 newton-meters of torque. 0 to 200 kilometers per hour takes 5.8 seconds. 0 to 300 takes less than 12.7. But those numbers are not the shocking part. The shocking part is where McLaren sends the power, all of it, to the rear wheels. Ferrari chose front electric motors for the F80. They provide more traction, a harder launch, and the ability to pull the car through a corner. McLaren deliberately walked away from that advantage. Why? Because front motors also add weight. They influence the steering, and they allow software to intervene before the driver fully understands what is happening. McLaren wanted the front wheels to perform one clear job: steer, which raises an almost absurd question. How do 2 tires survive more than 1,200 horsepower? The hybrid motor smooths the initial delivery. The 8-speed transmission contains an electronic differential, and the traction systems calculate how much torque the tires can accept, but they do not erase every movement. The W1 can still rotate, and as the rear tires approach their limit, the car communicates that moment before it becomes a surprise. The first drivers expected something intimidating. Instead, they found a car that felt linear, predictable, and strangely natural. Creating 1,200 horsepower is difficult. Making it understandable through only 2 driven wheels, maybe even harder, but McLaren had solved only the first problem, because hybrid power creates another enemy: weight. Weight slows the response, asks more from the tires, makes the brakes work harder, and places another layer between the driver and the road. The W1 needed hybrid power, massive cooling, active aerodynamics, and a transmission capable of surviving more than 1,200 horsepower. So how could McLaren add all of that without creating a heavy car disguised by even more power? The answer was to redesign the structure around the driver. The W1 uses a new carbon fiber monocoque called the Aerocell. The seats are integrated directly into it. Instead of moving the seat, The pedals and steering wheel move toward the driver. That saves space and creates more room beneath the cockpit for ground effect aerodynamics. The front suspension is mounted inboard like a racing prototype. Some components are 3D printed from titanium, and despite its hybrid system and transforming bodywork, the W1 has a quoted dry weight of only 1,399 kilograms, around 126 kilograms lighter than the Ferrari F80. But why should that difference matter? Because lower weight changes more than acceleration. It changes how quickly the car turns, how naturally it responds, and how much information reaches the driver. That is also why McLaren kept hydraulic steering. Electric steering would have been easier to program. But McLaren wanted the driver to feel the front tires loading, the resistance building, and the grip beginning to disappear. Yet the most dramatic piece of engineering was still hidden. Because in race mode, the W1 becomes a physically different car. Press the race button and the front drops by 37 millimeters, the rear drops by 17. An active front wing begins controlling the air beneath the car, and then the rear wing moves. Not a small flap, not a decorative spoiler. The active long tail travels rearward by as much as 300 millimeters. It extends the effective length of the underbody, changes the aerodynamic balance, and helps the W1 generate up to 1,000 kilograms of downforce. On a straight, the system can reduce drag. Under braking, it can act as an air brake. And through a corner, it turns speed into grip. But why not simply install a giant fixed wing? Because the W1 still has to work away from a circuit. McLaren wanted maximum downforce only when the driver needed it. At this point, the engine, suspension, floor, and moving bodywork no longer behave like separate systems. They become one machine. This should have been the moment McLaren took the advantage, but Ferrari still had an answer. In fact, on paper, Ferrari appeared to have an answer for everything. The Ferrari F80 produces 1,200 horsepower. Its 3-liter twin-turbocharged V6 draws technology from Formula 1 and Ferrari's Le Mans-winning 499P program. 2 electric motors drive the front axle, another supports the combustion engine. The F80 reaches 100 kilometers per hour in around 2.15 seconds. It has torque vectoring, fully active suspension, and more maximum downforce than the McLaren. It launches harder, its active systems are more sophisticated, and around the right circuit, its all-wheel drive traction may make it faster. So after everything McLaren had done, had Ferrari already won, only if the winner is decided by numbers alone. Because the W1 does not threaten the F80 by proving Ferrari's technology does not work. It works brilliantly. The threat comes from what that technology may place between the driver and the experience. In the F80, the front motors can pull the car through a corner, the suspension can continuously reshape its behavior, and the torque vectoring system can adjust the balance before the driver consciously identifies the problem. The result is extraordinary speed, control, confidence. But when the car is making so many decisions, how much is left for the driver? The W1 is not an analog car. It still uses hybrid power, software, active aerodynamics, and an electronic differential, but most of that complexity works beneath the surface. The driver primarily feels the tires, the steering, the brakes, and the rear axle. That is why the feature McLaren removed matters so much. The W1 does not have front electric motors. That sounds like a weakness, but it leaves the steering free from propulsion, reduces weight, and ensures the driver can feel which axle is doing the work. Ferrari built a machine capable of controlling almost every variable. McLaren built one that allows the driver to read those variables, and that difference matters because modern hypercars are approaching a dangerous point. They are becoming so fast that few owners can truly explore them, so intelligent that mistakes disappear before they are understood, and so capable that the driver can begin to feel unnecessary. Could a hypercar become too perfect, too controlled, too easy to admire, but too difficult to remember? The W1 does not answer that question by becoming slower. It makes extreme performance readable. When the front tires load, the steering explains it. When the rear tires approach their limit, the chassis reveals it progressively. It does not remove fear, it turns fear into information. But could something this extreme still work on a normal road? The most unexpected revelation from the first drives was not how the W1 behaved at Mugello. It was how normal it could feel away from the circuit. Visibility is better than its shape suggests. There is storage, even a cup holder. In comfort mode, the suspension can deal with imperfect roads. The brakes remain controllable, and the engine can settle down. Then the driver reaches a circuit, presses the race button, and the same car drops toward the asphalt. extends its tail, and approaches 200 miles per hour on Mugello's main straight. How can one car feel manageable on the road and then transform into something approaching a racing prototype? That breadth may be the W1's greatest achievement. A track-only machine can sacrifice everything for one lap. The W1 has to work everywhere, where while carrying the legacy of the F1 and P1, only 399 examples will be built. Ferrari plans to produce 799 F80s. The Ferrari may win certain measurements, but McLaren has not built a weaker version of Ferrari's idea. It has offered a completely different future, and that is what makes it dangerous. Ferrari believes the ultimate hypercar should control every possible variable. McLaren believes it should communicate every important sensation. One attempts to make performance perfect, the other attempts to make performance personal. That is why Mugello mattered. McLaren did not bring the W1 to Ferrari's circuit because it expected the F80 to surrender. It brought the car there to make its philosophy impossible to ignore. A V8 screaming beyond 9,000 revolutions per minute, more than 1,200 horsepower attacking only the rear tires, hydraulic steering transmitting the road through the driver's hands, and a rear wing physically extending as the speed rises. The W1 is not Ferrari's biggest threat because it makes the F80 obsolete. It does something more dangerous. It makes Ferrari's complexity feel like a choice rather than the only possible future. Because when every movement is predicted and every mistake is corrected, what remains for the driver to discover? The W1's answer is simple. The future can still be hybrid. It can still use software and active aerodynamics, but the person behind the wheel must remain necessary. And that is the real reason McLaren left out the front electric motors. Not because it lacked the technology, but because it refused to remove the driver from the center of the experience. The Ferrari F80 may be faster in some situations, it may be more advanced in others, but the W1 challenges Ferrari with a question no stopwatch can answer. Do you want the car that appears to do everything, or the car that makes you feel everything? So which philosophy would you choose? The technological domination of the Ferrari F80 or the lighter rear-wheel drive intensity of the McLaren W1? More control or more connection? Tell us in the comments and subscribe to The Lux Driven for cinematic stories about the world's most extraordinary cars.